like to talk a little bit about application whitelisting. We said a friend or foe, but primarily that's because it's an IT technology that we think has a lot of play in the ICS space. And advised by DHS, it's a good thing to do, but it does have some interesting connotations for the ICS environment, and that's what we want to go over a little bit today. So I am, as Sunny pointed out, I'm the Technical Director for Cybersecurity at Ultra 3EI. I do a lot of work with NATO, with the ICS community, especially with US DoD and UK critical infrastructure community. So Ultra 3EI, if you haven't come across them, we provide a lot of solutions to building automation, industrial control systems, SCADA solutions for the security-conscious ICS community. So that's primarily US DoD and government, the UK critical infrastructure community such as water and power. Anyone who really cares about security as one of their prime objectives in automation. So what we're going to talk a bit about today is the DHS came out with a great paper on the 7 steps you really should use to initially protect your industrial control system. And as they put out, across all of their 295 incidents, they reckon that about 98% of those incidents would have been prevented had the 7 steps been in place. So as a just starting block, deploying out these 7 steps across your environment will go a great way to protecting your ICS environment against cyber incidents. That doesn't necessarily mean complete exploitation, cyber attack, but it means cyber incidents. So disruption to your control system through a cyber means. So obviously the first one, if you read through the 7 stages, strategies, is application whitelisting, and that's what we'll be discussing exclusively today. As somebody pointed out, there are a few more of these same sessions planned later on in the year to go over the remaining 7 stages. So today, we'll quickly go over what DHS is outlining. If you really come across application whitelisting, what is, some of the threats, how you can deploy it in an ICS environment, and some takeaways. So this is primarily designed to be a quick primer for how to do it within the industrial control environment. So what does DHS say? They point out in those 2 bullet points exactly what you should use application whitelisting for and how it can prevent attack in your own system. Primarily, this is all about preventing software from running or communicating over the industrial control system. So have everything set up exactly how you want to. It shouldn't change. You shouldn't be able to install new applications. Malware shouldn't be accidentally run from within your network, and malicious commands shouldn't be sent throughout the network that you weren't expecting. So that in mind, what are we really talking about? And that's really, if we think about industrial control environment, we have historically really used a lot of external protections. That is, keep everything bad outside the network. Don't allow anything bad in, and if we don't allow anything bad in, we'll be fine. Unfortunately, one of the very first things that DHS points out in the report is simply building a network with a hardened perimeter is no longer adequate. Well, why is this? Because think about it, we end up realizing that actually there's lots of ways that malicious software or hardware can get inside our industrial control systems. No matter how good we build our perimeter, no matter how good our security policies are about preventing unauthorized soft hardware from gaining access, we still do it. Either people can bring in USB sticks, regular Microsoft Patch Tuesday, antivirus signatures, or administrators, maintainers, operators coming in with their own equipment, such as laptops. If you have something going on with one of your pieces of machinery, typically a vendor's engineer will arrive on site. They might bring with them their own IT equipment, their own laptops, and plug it in to diagnose what the matter is. In all of these cases, there's multiple ways of acting and getting over that external boundary protection. No air-gap system is going to be completely foolproof. Historically, what we talk about air gaps as being basically low bandwidth channels. That means An air gap isn't going to prevent anything getting into your network. It's just going to make it more difficult and more slow. So what we're concentrating today is application whitelisting sits inside that boundary. This complementary to existing protections, such as firewalls, such as boundary protections. This is about, okay, if something does get in, how do we protect it once inside the network? I'm really talking about this because we have starting to see more and more examples. Historically, we've always just talked about Stuxnet as being one of the only occasions that this cyber attack in industrial control systems, but starting to see more of them. The Ukrainian example is the one that's in the forefront of everybody's minds, but essentially once attackers gain access to the system, are they able to upload firmware? Are they able to modify the system and do anything damaging? The Ukrainian incident was a very good illustration of what they can do and where application whitelisting can help. Because while they may have used legitimate credentials to gain access to a system, there were indications that what they did was upload firmware to serial to Ethernet converters and modify the system in operation. So once they launched their attack, it made recovery efforts a lot more difficult because some of the equipment themselves were modified. Now, during operations, there should have been no ability to update the firmware if everything is running correctly. Unauthorized update of equipment, update of code shouldn't have been carried out. And as a result of that, it actually hampered efforts to get everything back online. That's just one example where application whitelisting would have prevented a lot of hassle. It may not have prevented the initial attack, but certainly would have helped prevent the ongoing incident, and it made recovery efforts a lot easier. If you haven't come across application whitelisting, what we're talking about is still a bit confused. It's actually a relatively simple concept. The idea is you take an existing system, you look at both the applications, the files, everything installed on it. So if you think of your PC, you just take an inventory of what applications have you installed, what drivers, what version of operating system is running on your computer. Take a snapshot of that. You work out signatures for each of those applications. So in a little bit more detail, you take a hash of those applications and those files and those drivers, and you ensure that those applications you want to run, and if they are, you say whitelist and say these applications with these specific hashes we're going to authorize to run. If anything changes, if that application ever tries to get modified, if anything else gets installed and tries to run, and the hash of that application or the driver or that file is not in that whitelist, then it'll be prevented from running. So we're all used to running our own laptop or PCs at home and can download and install new applications and run those. While in an application, any system where you're running application whitelisting software, what it does is even though you may be able to download something, as soon as you come to execute it, it will actually prevent it from running. Very simple. It just turns the model from you choose what you download and install to it will, and you say, instead of doing something like virus, which is blacklisting, use application whitelisting, which is whitelisting. So what do I mean by that? What this is really, if you think of antivirus, we're currently seeing additional signatures. So antivirus is really a blacklist method. What that means is anything can run except for those that explicitly say no. And the unfortunate thing is you can see the graph on the left is the number of new pieces of malware is exploding. Just last year, there was over 140 million new pieces of malware reported to avs.org. 16 looks to break even that record. So the problem with a signature, a blacklist method, is you have to constantly update all those bad signatures. Again, there's the method of anything can run except these explicitly bad signatures, where whitelist kind of turns that on its head and says, instead of constantly updating those signatures, we're going to say statically, only these we have explicitly authorized to run can run. And anything else, we don't care what it is not authorized to run. So on industrial control system, you may authorize your SCADA or your DCS control application. You may authorize your database, your historian application, but you may say, you know what, Microsoft Word, even if it's a legitimate application, I actually don't want Word to run at all. So you can whitelist Word and say, nope, can't run that. Say, I don't want any browser technology. So you can not authorize Internet Explorer or Chrome or Firefox, even though those are legitimate applications for your specific system, they won't have been authorized for use. And typically, these systems are very easy to control. You basically take a snapshot of your system. It's just a trust, don't trust model. And really true not only of the applications running on a PC, but if you think about what will run on your PLC, your embedded systems out in the wild, out of the edge of your network, run the same application whitelisting software. So one can buy application whitelisting software for a number of different vendors to run on a Linux or Windows or Mac has it built in. You have those for the general purpose computers. We talk about PLCs or RTUs or other embedded computers. They don't have the same ability to run that software. So instead what you can do is say, instead of controlling what software can run, you go, I will only control what application commands can be sent. So at the application level, you control whether or not you allow things such as firmware read-write, you can do fail rewrite, you can do command, turn on, turn off, reboot, etc. So you may say during normal operations, even if it's just a command, I do not want you to be able to write the firmware on this device. Oh, during maintenance periods, will I allow this? So it's actually very difficult, and just on the left-hand side shows you some of Digital Bond's really great DNP3 quick draw rules. This helps to describe all the different known issues with DNP3, and it's just a subset of some of the rules. Actually becomes very, very complicated, and trying to describe all the different ways that you create a bad DNP3 rule is quite mind-blowing. It's a very complex protocol, and so all the different bad ways are even greater than the protocol. Instead of that, if you go to a whitelisting approach, instead of saying all the different ways you can't say something or all the different bad commands, I won't allow any of those. I'm only going to allow the good commands. So whitelisting at the command level becomes a lot easier because you only have to select those things you want, and the whole myriad of other bad things are just not allowed at all by default. So when we come to look at it from an industrial control perspective, what is we're talking about? What kind of software can you do? One of the first questions we normally get asked after we do this talk is, all right, well, which piece of software do you recommend we run on our industrial control system? That's actually a complicated question, and one that we're definitely not going to provide an opinion on, because primarily you have to ensure that the application whitelisting software that you choose is compatible with the SCADA or DCS or ICS software that you're running. Typically, ICS software, if you think of a DCS system, not only does the application run, but it normally has specialized drivers and specialized hooks into the operating system to allow it to perform real-time and distributed control. Now, not all versions of application whitelisting software are compatible with those local operating system hooks. So you have to ensure that anything you do want to deploy has been blessed by the SCADA, by the DCS vendor before you deploy that out. But having said that, there are plenty of them out there that have been tested, approved, and validated for use in industrial control systems, and actually all pretty similar in scope and pretty similar in usability. It's a very simple model that typically you scan your system, it pops up, you choose which applications you want to say yes or no, and then as you're going along and doing your day job, if anybody tries to install a system, alert just like the ones on the left are going to pop up and say, I'm sorry, you can't run this. This is not in this approved list, and we'll send an alert. So that alert will normally go both to the user and to the administrator and help the administrator to work out, should this actually be allowed? Is this a case of mistaken identity? And actually this this is required, or should we turn it off? And typically, if you update systems, so anytime they have a patch coming around for a new version of software, you'll have to go back and re-baseline the software, re-allow that piece of software to run. And again, you can have the same sort of thing from a command perspective. So we have two pictures there from DNP3 whitelisting and backnet whitelisting. So again, all you're doing is selecting which commands you want to allow and which commands you don't. So for DNP3, if you're aware of the difference between select and operate or direct operate, you can make those decisions within the whitelist application. And as a result, a small plug for our product, Cyber basically performs control whitelisting functionality with multiple different protocols. It has been approved to NIST validations, which is the only product on the market to have gone through independent validation to do this, but enables you to really correspond, enable to push application whitelisting from core of the network, where you'll have a McAfee or a McAfee or Trend Micro or a Parity5 solution on your PCs, all the way out to your embedded, your PLC, your control end, to actually prevent the upload of software or malicious malware into your control system, and also the prevention of unauthorized commands or activities such as firmware rewrites out to your control edge. So, the benefits of whitelisting. Well, it's self-explanatory. It complements boundary protection. So where you have great boundary protection and good security policies to protect unauthorized addition of software from the outside or an addition of hardware from the outside, still there's always going to be times where that sort of strict and hard rule will be modified, especially during any sort of maintenance cycle or incident or quick upgrade that needs to happen. So in that case, when those things do happen, whitelisting is going to prevent any unauthorized software, anything that does make its way past that boundary, from executing within the control environment. One great thing is it helps ensure policy adherence. You can have great policy, you can have great staff who try and adhere as closely as possible to that policy, but there are always going to be indications, there are always going to be exceptions to those rules where, well, just for this once, maybe I will allow you to do this. Okay, I need to transfer a file quickly. All right, I know I really shouldn't, but I'll quickly use a USB stick just because it's easy. Application whitelisting helps enforce policy adherence by basically trying to make it impossible for the user to commit an error, such as installing a program they shouldn't do. It's reliability because apart from no ICS-specific attacks, we've all seen recently the headlines where in the US, a couple of different hospitals have just been attacked by ransomware, where once it gets involved, I don't think the makers of that ransomware were intentionally targeting that hospital, but once the malware gets on, it starts replicating, it starts encrypting files, it starts doing things it shouldn't do and actually impacting operations. There's just as much potential for an industrial control environment, such as a power station or utility, an oil or a gas drill or distribution network, from being infected with ransomware just as easily as a hospital. As once that ransomware gets on and is allowed to run, it will continue to do bad things. So obviously, application whitelisting does a great job of preventing ransomware from running, because even if it does install, even if a user does accidentally open up an attachment they shouldn't do, run a macro within Microsoft Word and it creates an exploitation, still once that occurs, that ransomware won't be authorized to run, and therefore won't be able to encrypt and actually impact the reliability of your system. And improve safety only because it actually prevents unauthorized actions from occurring. If you test your system and you ensure and you know that some things such as rewrite of firmware, updates to endpoint machines, updates to end folders, is not allowed to occur outside of maintenance windows. So sort of those are the functions which can be enforced at the policy level into the system. So as to even if somebody tries to do something either unintentionally, through of malware, or maliciously and intentionally tries to do it, they'll be prevented from doing so, and an alert will be generated. What application whitelisting and application control really enforces is find a predictable system. It just, once you have a system that you like, once you have a system that's tried and tested, you can lock it down and you can start preventing changes. So now you can just modify, the user can go, can in front of their indices, can modify the real system by sending commands through it, but they won't be able to modify the operation of the underlying cyber software and hardware. It also limits the actions and opportunities of an attacker. So once an attacker does gain access to the system and installs a piece of software, actually what they're able to do is strictly limited. They're not able to install different pieces of software and have them run. They're not able to modify drivers. So if Stuxnet got into an engineering terminal and started to modify the underlying read-write DLL drivers of the Windows machine in order to carry out its attacks, if I'd been running application whitelisting software that once Stuxnet had been installed and starts to modify the DLLs, it would be immediately evident, and the software, those linked libraries would not be able to run and would not be able to be used. Actually got onto the system. So I said before, there are three major areas where you can deploy application whitelisting. The first is at the hypervisor server end. Normally, a lot of industrial control systems have large back-end servers, from data historians to engineering workstation to engineering development environments. OP servers, those can all be hosted both in a private space or a public cloud. Both of those are typically run in a virtualized and can be run in a virtualized environment, in which case your application software, whitelisting software, should be able to run and be able to work in a virtualized environment. And there's a slightly different, the next stage, which is the host-based application control. So that's when you will install an application whitelisting software on an endpoint, such as a PC. So the hypervisor and servers, those are slightly different and can be designed to really look at virtualized environments. The application, the endpoint end, of what's normally used to be running on PCs. And then finally, the command whitelisting level is what you can do to protect your PLCs, which don't have the ability to actually run the same whitelisting software that you can get for both the hypervisors and the endpoint PCs. But all three of these are basically designed to do the same thing, which is once you have a configuration, a specific load of software and a specific set of commands that you're happy with, those are the only things that are allowed to occur. So whitelist or lockdown approach, as opposed to a blacklist trying to detect when anything is wrong. So while it's good and it's advisable, and it's the first thing that the DHS 7 steps really advise you to deploy, there are some challenges to actually implementing it. First of all, these deployments can take time. You're basically modifying and changing the method of operation of a system from a blacklist, from a trusty user, but will end up looking and preventing no bad things from occurring, to really taking the control out of the user's hands and locking down the system and saying, the day-to-day operations, you're not allowed to change the system. We're going to map everything on that existing PC or hypervisor, or the command center of the network. We're going to lock decide what they all are, lock them down, and prevent anything else. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's not part of those whitelists, it's not allowed to run. This is going to create administrator overhead, because you now have to require somebody to constantly maintain a list of what is authorized, and if that list changes, they have to re-go through that and update their whitelisting. Once you've deployed it once you've got it actually operating in the real environment, that's normally the first headache, is just getting it out there. Once you have that working, over time, it just becomes a slight delta to your ongoing operations and ongoing maintenance cycles. But you should expect there to be an impact, increased downtime when you perform upgrades, patches, or system changes. The reason why I say that is once you've deployed it and you tested it, once it's actually out there, they need to go back through and reauthorize that reauthorize that application. It's not a silver bullet. It's great, and as I've described it, I hope you have the idea that once you lock a system down, well, nothing can change. In reality, application whitelisting software isn't able to defeat every different type of attack. For instance, in-memory attacks, they have a lot more challenge with, as opposed to installed and executable whitelisting. What that is, a piece of malware normally goes through the different stages of attack. The first is if I can cause a buffer overflow, if I can manipulate a already running application. Once I can compromise that existing running application, be that web server, be that an email client, be that Microsoft Word, Adobe Flash, once I compromise that, I can then leverage that existing sort of corrupted application to install my own remote access Trojan or rat or my own malicious software, and then I can use that own software will then run and carry out my nefarious activities. So while application whitelisting will be able to prevent me from installing and running my piece of exploit malware, what it wouldn't be able to do is necessarily protect me against those that initial attack of compromising that already running application. They are getting better, and they're getting better at determining if there are changes to an application in memory at runtime, but it's not quite there yet. And so you should still expect there is a potential to corrupt, existing running applications that could survive, that doesn't necessarily have to survive a reboot. So once you reboot the machine, you'll be able to get rid of those in-memory attacks and go to an existing system. So it wouldn't necessarily, application whitelisting helps ensure that a system remains static over time, as in if you reboot the system, but there's no guarantee it would be 100% effective against real-time ongoing attacks against in-memory attacks. So one thing you should really know is what about using it for OT environments as opposed to IT environments is OT environment, things are pretty static. You don't change a lot, which means that the overhead for keeping application whitelisting rule to date is pretty straightforward. Anytime you want to modify the system in terms of a defined maintenance period, that's where changes would occur. But apart from that, there's really not a lot of call for operators to start installing or changing systems on the fly outside of normal maintenance periods. It's not like a regular IT environment where users wanting to change, modify, updating things on an ongoing basis. Having said that, even though it is, once you define everything, it should remain static. It shouldn't be operated as a static defense. What I really mean by that is, once you define everything, you need to review the controls and you need to investigate alerts. Some attacker tries to install something and tries to run it, it's going to generate an alert. If you're not cognizant when those alerts occur, if you're not taking action when they occur, you're just trusting that the system is going to work fine, protect you, but you're going to understand that an attacker has actually tried to attack you. There is an ongoing incident, so there's been a policy failure, there's been a security failure somewhere because more has got onto the system and is attempting to do something bad. Respond to that. And advanced persistent threats, if you are being targeted, they generally don't stop after one failed attempt. But you are able to detect it at that first stage. So once they try something once and it fails because whitelisting prevents it, that should be a first warning that somebody's trying to attack you and what additional mitigations or what other additional steps should you take. You need to consider who administers the system. Obviously, there's a divide between the IT and OT communities in terms of who has responsibility for updating, maintaining, and administering the systems. Anytime you want to install application whitelisting software onto your PCs or out in the network, there needs to be an appropriate person who is the one who's going to administer it. That administrator has to know what they are whitelisting. There's definitely a risk within, and we've seen it happen again and again with application whitelisting software, that there are risks that users just blindly click accept. Oh, I installed a piece of software. Oh, yep, that's running. I know that. And they just click accept, accept, accept. until it works. Or there is an increased risk of incident due to frustration. And what I mean by that is once something's going wrong and a user just wants to get things working and a piece of software or malware essentially tries to constantly install itself, and in itself it's going to could start generating lots and lots of warnings. So at some point, just to get on with their day job, you have to be careful that an administrator isn't going to suddenly go, oh, right, I just need to click yes, because if I click yes, then I can get on and actually carry on and do another activity. So the risk actually in causing frustration in the user to the point where they actually end up turning it off to carry out their ongoing operations is a real risk, and that should be whoever is administering and making those decisions needs to understand the balances and the trade-offs they're making from clicking yes, trust, to no, don't trust. So overall, I think that's kind of where we are. We're at the end of the talk. I hope you enjoyed this sort of half hour. If I could leave you with 3 things to take away, and that is when you think about application whitelisting, really you want to think of the difference between fragility and robustness. And application whitelisting helps in 3 ways. The first is instead of only know bad applications can't run, that's a blacklisting antivirus software. In reality, whitelist software only allows good applications to run. That's just a much easier approach. We don't have to worry about constantly updating antivirus software with more and more indications of what's bad. We only have to list initially what is good. Second way, instead of a fragile system is one where you say, you know what, we've tested all the legitimate commands, all the different ways that a protocol could send the commands, so it should be fine. A more robust system is saying, look, we only allow anticipated commands. So if firm rewrite is an unanticipated command during normal operations, outside of maintenance periods, prevent it. If you end up sending a form DNP3 message, or we've all heard of the traditional ping sweep, where a network tester comes on to perform a ping sweep of what's out there, and that ends up crashing some of the more fragile, more legacy controllers. Those are all unanticipated messages. So even if somebody does get on and try to send those messages, because they're unanticipated, they should not be allowed. And finally, good policy and procedure prevents malicious activity. That's more of a fragile way of looking at it. Instead, if you try and implement things saying unauthorized and unanticipated changes are forbidden and alerted, that's a more acceptable method. So instead of relying on everybody just following this policy procedure and trusting that everybody's going to do everything right all the time, we try and make it so that the user is unable to actually able to not follow the policy. See what I mean? Okay, so I hope that's been informative. I hope you've enjoyed that. I'll happily take questions